Imagine walking through a forest at night and stumbling across a group of witches. You may conjure up an image of some old hags gathered around a cauldron, complete with broomsticks, pointed hats, and maybe a black cat. How about this instead? A group of respectable elderly men and women, dancing naked and chanting wildly. I'm not sure what would terrify me more. Legend has it that a group called the New Forest Coven did exist, and during the Second World War, they performed an ancient magic ritual to prevent Adolf Hitler invading Britain. In this episode, I'm heading out to discover if this was true or just a lot of hocus pocus. I'm Andy Jones, a writer and producer. Join me as I set out to discover the unusual histories and intriguing mysteries of Great Britain. In this series, I'm visiting the New Forest in Hampshire. Episode 3. The Witches That Stopped Hitler. A while back, I was at a gig when a comedy act called the Sweet Chunks took to the stage. The lead singer of the band, Aubrey, explained that he'd been inspired to write an anthem for his home county, Hampshire. The lyrics of the folk rock number proclaimed that Hampshire was the best county in the country. This was quite a statement, and the song went on to list various reasons for the claim. These included that Hampshire has the world's shortest bus driver, the world's oldest goat, and a group of witches who during the Second World War tried to stop Adolf Hitler invading Britain. I was intrigued by this last story and set out to investigate if this was true. Sure enough, a quick Google search threw up a number of references to the Cone of Power, all of which pointed to a mysterious group called the New Forest Coven. Acting on a hunch, I decided to head out to a small village in the forest that I knew had a strong association with witchcraft. I'm driving down the A31, which is the dual carriageway which connects Hampshire through to Dorset, and it also dissects the New Forest in half. I'm looking for an exit here, which is to the village of Burley. Here we go. So I've got to Burley now. You drop down into Burley. It's in a little sort of valley. The hills gently rise up either side. And I suppose the best way of describing it is like a dell, really. There's some very old trees here, as there is everywhere in the New Forest, that sort of ancient feeling. And as you can hear, the road through the village is actually quite busy. It's a very popular spot for tourists. There's a couple of ice cream parlours here, a couple of pubs, a cycle hire shop, a very strange shop in front of me which has got 3 tractors and an old Land Rover in. I'm not sure if that's all for sale. And it's got a variety of gift shops, and there is definitely a theme to the gift shops. So I've walked up a bit now, up the high street, and by my reckoning there are 5 gift shops here which all have a sort of theme of witchcraft. There's one called Away with the Fairies, an actual shop called Witchcraft, one called Cobwebs and Crystals, where you can get your tarot reading done there. And then round the corner there's a very interesting one called a Coven of Witches. Well, is that what I've been looking for? The New Forest Coven? I'm not sure it is, but I'm going to go and have a look. I have to say I was surprised. I was expecting a tourist souvenir shop
and there was a variety of kitsch trinkets, postcards, tea towels and packets of fudge. But the larger part of the shop was given over to serious witchcraft paraphernalia. There was a wide range of modern books on divination, spiritualism and palmistry. There were ingredients for potions, ready-made potions, spell-casting kits, runic dice, crystal pendants, and even small cauldrons. However, what really caught my attention was the customers and how serious they took the subject. I even heard two women discussing the virtues of a particular crystal and how its magical properties could be recharged in full moonlight. In the age of full-fibre broadband and AI computing, witchcraft is alive and well in the New Forest. Although, I think it's important to say that I didn't see anything that looked evil or satanic. In the corner, hung above a fireplace, was a short history of the shop. Alas, my hunch was incorrect. The shop had nothing to do with the Cone of Power and the New Forest Coven. It was actually opened after the Second World War by Sybil Leek, a self-proclaimed white witch. Although she wasn't involved in the story I've set out to discover, she is worthy of mention. Sybil Leek was the first person to publicly announce she was a white witch when the Witchcraft Act was repealed in 1951. She was a charismatic character who attracted a lot of attention, and her shop in Burley quickly became a popular destination for tourists. Unfortunately, the locals weren't very keen on a witch openly trading on the village high street, and her landlord refused to renew her lease. As a consequence, she packed up and moved to America, where she worked as an astrologer and made numerous appearances on TV. Here's her talking about witchcraft in a quite frankly chilling documentary called Occult, X Factor or Fraud, from 1972.
One medium who sees her brand of white magic as a force for good now and in the future. Author and witch, Sybil Leek.
I am a witch, and I follow an ancient occult pre-Christian religion of witchcraft. Every century, every generation has always needed a shoulder to cry upon. The witches of the world have been the psychologists, the healers, the doctors, the midwives, and very often the neighbouring good friend who could do just a little more for a person than serve tea and sympathy.
Sybil Leek's legacy is still very strong in Burley. Maybe she cast some spell over the village. She's certainly the reason for all the witchcraft shops that line the high street.
Well, unfortunately, the shop and the village of Burley were a dead end for me. I think I need to travel further south.
The story of the Cone of Power centres around a man called Gerald Gardner. Gardner is considered by some to be the father of modern witchcraft, or Wicca. That's W-I-C-C-A, as in the Old English. Nothing to do with the film The Wicker Man, although the theme of pagan ceremony is similar. Gardner was born in Lancashire in 1884 and spent much of his life abroad working on tea plantations. He had an interest in anthropology and archaeology, and sometime during the 1920s began to visit spiritual mediums. In 1937 he retired and returned to England. After spending some time in London, he and his wife moved to Highcliffe, in the southwest corner of the New Forest.
So where I'm heading for is a place called Highcliffe. Now, if you want to be pedantic, the town actually sits a mile or two, or it's outside of the national park boundary, but it's still east of the River Avon, the original Norman boundary of the New Forest.
Highcliffe is a charming, sleepy seaside town with a high percentage of retired people. And there's one grumpy resident that would be very familiar to anyone who watched British television in the 1990s.
So that's Treselyan Way, the house of Victor Meldrew.
I don't believe it!
Well, we're not looking for TV stars today, we're actually heading towards the beach. And we are at the Cliffhanger restaurant. So this is Highcliffe. It's not actually that much of a high cliff compared to some cliffs. I mean, it's only about 100 foot high or so, but it has got a terrific view. Now I'm looking out south over the water towards the Isle of Wight. I can see the Needles over there in the distance. And the cliffs roll down to the sandy, well, it's not sandy, it's sort of pebbly beach down below. Now, I know this place fairly well, actually, because I come here quite a bit in the summer. And you do question why on earth we spend all that money squeezing onto planes and heading out to the Mediterranean when you have this right here in Great Britain. You can really see why so many people retire down here. And what I've got to do is work my way down the cliff, because I've got to go down to the beach, and I'm looking for a footpath that turns back inland. I think I can see it. Now I found the path which runs from the beach up into the woodland behind, and I'm following it up. It's kind of like a gully. It's a wooded area called Chewton Bunny, and there's a stream in the middle, and I presume that makes sense because I'm looking for the mill house, and well, that's probably the stream that powered the mill house originally. It's quite built up either side. It's lovely in the woods here, but it's quite built up either side of the wooded area with sort of mid-late 20th century houses. But back in 1938, looking at the original maps, I presume this would have all been sort of farmland around this area.
The story of how Gerald Gardner discovered the New Forest coven varies from source to source, and most of the details are rather sketchy. When he moved to Highcliffe, he joined the Rosicrucian Order Crotona Fellowship, a secret mystical society that held meetings in a purpose-built wooden hall. The building has long gone, but if you're interested, it stood about 100 yards down from the McDonald's drive-thru on the B3059. Gardner claimed that through people he met at the Rosicrucian Fellowship, he was invited to the house of Dorothy Clutterbuck, a wealthy woman who owned a large property in Highcliffe. On that night, he was stripped naked and forced to take part in an initiation ceremony. Yes, I know this is starting to sound like a 1970s porno, but it appears that most of the participants were pensioners. Gardner learnt that the men and women involved were all members of the New Forest Coven, a group of witches who claimed their roots stretched back to a time before Christianity spread through Britain. He later wrote, "I then knew that which I had thought burnt out hundreds of years ago still survived." The coven was very secretive, and for good reason. In 1938, it was still illegal to practice witchcraft in Britain. In fact, one of the last people to be tried and convicted of witchcraft was Helen Duncan in 1943. She had upset the authorities by publicly claiming to have contacted the spirit of a dead sailor who had drowned when HMS Barham, a Royal Navy ship, was sunk in the Mediterranean Sea. The problem was that the news of HMS Barham's sinking had been kept top secret. Either Helen Duncan had overheard information, had a lucky guess, or really did have a hotline to the departed.
Now I want to continue on up through the woods because I think at the top here we'll find Dorothy Clutterbuck's house. And here we are. The Mill House, or formerly Churton Mill, circa 1740. A large fence, security cameras and an intercom system. What was a 17th century mill house appears to have been turned into a very desirable modern residence. It's not surprising, because property around here is highly sought after. I mean, it literally is a short walk to a gorgeous beach, so it must be worth a fortune. I wonder if Dorothy Clutterbuck had an intercom system. Or did she just rely on a banishing charm to keep unwanted guests away?
Of course, these days we tend to associate witches with evil. In part, that's due to the fairy tales we hear as children. But the idea of witches really come from fragments of ancient religions that predate Christianity. Most of these religions were based on natural phenomena, such as the seasons of the year and phases of the moon. As opposed to turning people into frogs, the spells and rituals tended to be for more positive reasons, such as healing the sick and blessing the harvest. To be a white witch like Gerald Gardner and the New Forest Coven, means to practice natural or benevolent magic. Gardner was initiated into the New Forest Coven in September 1939. The same month, the war broke out in Europe. After Hitler invaded France in May 1940, the threat of invasion hung over Britain. All across the south of England, defences were erected. Barbed wire was spread over the beaches. Machine gun posts were positioned on important roadways and bridges. Tank traps were set out in the fields and forests. The population prepared for war. And so did Gardner. He actually joined the local defence volunteer or Home Guard. Unbeknown to his comrades, he was also preparing for a top-secret operation. According to his 1955 book, Modern Witchcraft, Gardner claims that he and other members of the New Forest Coven met secretly one night in a forest clearing. Here they performed an elaborate ritual around a large wooden cone. Their objective was to send a magical energy directly to Berlin and prevent Hitler's army from crossing the Channel. Gardner refers to this ritual as Operation Cone of Power, and accordingly, it wasn't the first time it had been used to protect Britain. Purportedly, another group of witches used it to prevent the Spanish Armada landing in 1588. There's also rumours it was performed by a group of Californian witches in 1971 to bring an end to the Vietnam War. In folklore, the cone shape can be considered to have mystical powers, a large mass at one end being reduced to a point, like the cone shape of an icing bag that a baker might use. All that icing is packed in at one end and squeezed through the small nozzle in a precise, intense bead. This principle also applies to the Cone of Power ritual. All the energy of the participants is gathered at the bottom. This is created by everybody joining hands in a circle around the cone and chanting or drumming. Wearing clothes is optional. When the participants have been whipped up into a frenzy, the priest or head witch then releases the power towards the target. When the New Forest Coven performed the ritual, they did it naked and chanted, "You cannot cross the sea. You cannot cross the sea. You cannot come. You cannot come."
One thing I've not been able to really establish is exactly where Gardner and the New Forest Coven performed the Cone of Power ritual. It seems to be, even these days, seems to be shrouded in some secrecy. And to start by my searching on the internet and asking a few questions, nobody's given me a definitive answer. But I imagine the New Forest was an ideal place to perform it, with the ancient woodland. And as I stand here now, not far from Dorothy Clutterbuck's house, and look down towards the beach, across the sea, towards Europe, and of course that's where they would have wanted to focus all that magical power, right the way to Berlin.
Gardner's account ends on a solemn note. He claims that at least 2 of the coven members died while performing the ritual. Is it possible that the power of this ceremony was that lethal? I think, even in wartime, 2 suspicious deaths wouldn't have gone unnoticed by the authorities. Most historians will tell you that Operation Sea Lion, that was the German invasion of Great Britain, never took place because of various reasons. These included the logistical issues of crossing the Channel with an army, the failure of the Luftwaffe to gain air supremacy during the Battle of Britain, and the strength of the Royal Navy. But maybe it was none of that. Maybe it was all down to a group of pensioners holding hands and chanting. In 2021, the National Census of Great Britain recorded nearly 12,000 people who claimed Wicca or witchcraft as their religion. In making this podcast, I was genuinely surprised to see how Gerald Gardner's legacy lives on today. Let's have one final word from the burly witch, Sybil Leek, and her own views on the religion.
Young people will never be afraid of witchcraft. But older people and fundamentalists see witchcraft as a challenge, as a destructive weapon towards the sacred cows, which they believe in so much.
In the year 3000, I know I'll be back again taking an interest in things. And you know what? Even if you don't believe in reincarnation, you'll be there too.
It's been a pleasure to share this story with you. If you've enjoyed it, please do subscribe to the podcast and maybe share it with your friends. In the next episode, I'll be on the run with fugitive rebels and searching for the last woman in England to be executed by beheading. To find out more about me and my writing, you can find me on social media or via my website, ajonesauthor.com. This podcast was written and presented by Andy Jones and is a Copia production.